All right, we're about to go on a whirlwind tour of American history. But listen, this isn't going to be your standard textbook list of dates and events. Nope. This is the story of a nation built on a really powerful, and let's be honest, often contradictory set of ideas. So let's dive in and see how that story has unfolded, from its very earliest days right up to today.
But before we jump in, let's start with a big question, one that kind of frames everything we're about to talk about. How does a nation's story even get written? It's so often a story of these incredible ideals clashing with some pretty harsh realities. And that tension, that's right at the very heart of the American experience.
Okay, let's rewind. We're going to start at the beginning, way back in a time before the United States was even a single country. We'll explore how this collection of really different colonies somehow came together to create a brand new identity and fight for their independence.
Now, it is absolutely crucial to remember that this history didn't just start when Europeans showed up. For thousands and thousands of years before Jamestown or Plymouth Rock, this continent was a vibrant, thriving landscape of diverse indigenous nations, each with its own incredibly rich history and culture.
So, the spark that lit the fuse for everything that came next, it was this famous phrase. But taxation without representation, well, it was never just about the money. It was about something much, much bigger. The fundamental idea that people should have the right to govern themselves, to actually have a voice in the laws that shape their lives.
And this is where things get really radical. The colonists didn't just want a new king, they wanted a whole new system, a republic, an idea where power flows from the people up, not from a monarch down. I mean, this was a revolutionary concept. But as we're about to see, that amazing promise of liberty wasn't for everyone. And that contradiction would haunt the new nation for centuries. So, the new nation was born, but its survival? That was far from a sure thing. This next chapter in American history is all about explosive growth, but it's also about these deep, deep divisions that would eventually threaten to tear the entire country apart. The 19th century was really driven by this one big idea called manifest destiny, this belief that the nation was somehow destined to stretch from coast to coast. And while this idea fueled incredible growth, it came at an absolutely immense human cost, leading to the brutal and forced removal of Native American populations from their ancestral lands. What's so powerful about this slide is how it just perfectly captures the nation literally splitting in two. You've got the North, where an industrial economy is booming, and along with it, anti-slavery sentiment is starting to really grow. And then you have the South, with an agrarian economy that was almost completely dependent on the institution of slavery. These weren't just small differences, these were two worlds that could not coexist, and they were on a collision course.
And that collision, it was the Civil War. It's almost impossible to overstate the devastation of this conflict. To this day, it is still the deadliest war in American history. A brutal, bloody reminder of the price a nation pays when it's divided against itself.
But out of that fire, something profound happened. The war finally ended, the Union was preserved, and, most importantly, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution was passed, officially and finally abolishing the institution of slavery. In so many ways, it was like a second founding for the nation. All right, so with the nation forcibly stitched back together, its focus shifted. It turned from internal conflict to external growth. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw the United States morph into an industrial powerhouse, a change that would have huge consequences, both at home and all around the world. This period was a total roller coaster of boom and bust. You had the Gilded Age with its incredible industrial growth, creating massive fortunes, but also shocking inequality. Then the nation steps onto the world stage in World War I, followed by the cultural explosion of the Roaring '20s. But of course, the party came to a screeching halt with the Great Depression, the worst economic crisis in American history. It was only the massive effort to mobilize for World War II that finally pulled the country out of it and, in the process, established it as a dominant global power. So here's the bottom line. By the end of the Second World War, the United States was transformed. It wasn't an isolated nation anymore. It was the world's #1 economic power and the only country on Earth with the most destructive weapon ever created. This new global status brought a totally new kind of conflict, one that wasn't fought on traditional battlefields, but in the world of ideas. And at the exact same time, another battle, a battle for the very soul of the nation, was being fought right here at home. For nearly 50 years, global politics were defined by one thing: the Cold War. This was this incredibly tense, high-stakes rivalry with the Soviet Union. It was fought through things like proxy wars in places like Korea and Vietnam, where each superpower backed an opposing side. It was a global chess match that played out everywhere, from the race to the moon to the constant, terrifying threat of nuclear war.
But while America was looking outward, an equally important struggle for justice was happening right within its own borders. Powerful voices from the civil rights movement rose up, demanding that America finally live up to its own founding ideals of liberty and equality for all of its citizens.
And this wasn't just about protests. It led to real, tangible change. Through incredible strategies like nonviolent resistance and brilliant legal challenges, the movement successfully took on systemic racism and segregation. This all led to landmark laws like the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Its impact inspired countless other social movements and fundamentally reshaped American society.
So as the Cold War finally came to an end, a new era began. This one was defined by a technological revolution, new kinds of global threats, and a social and political landscape that was changing faster than ever. This brings us to our final chapter, the digital age.
The 21st century began with a profound shock. The September 11th attacks didn't just change the New York City skyline. They fundamentally shifted American foreign policy, kicking off a new, complex, and difficult era defined by the global war on terror.
And the shocks just kept coming. In 2008, the financial crisis exposed some deep cracks in the global economic system. And then, just over a decade later, the COVID-19 pandemic showed all of us just how vulnerable our interconnected world really is to a public health crisis.
And that brings us right up to today. We're living through a time of intense political polarization, a division that feels as deep as any in recent memory. And at the exact same time, we're all grappling with the rise of technologies like artificial intelligence, which, let's face it, is going to reshape our world in ways we are only just beginning to imagine.
So, that leaves us here. The story of the United States has always been one of constant change, of conflict, and of reinvention. It's an unfinished story, an ongoing experiment. And the real question, for all of us, is what will its next chapter be?